You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing a Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. We have a couple of different things to talk about. Yes, we will stay somewhat on the Michigan State of it all. We're going to relegate that to one segment in the middle. We're going to see where our conversation takes us in overall thoughts in segment 3, but we have to obviously start out with the college football playoff rankings are out. Michigan comes in at number 5, and there's a lot of people on social media that are questioning why Michigan is ranked number 5 in the rankings behind Clemson of all teams. Clemson had jumped Michigan in the AP poll. Michigan jumped right back over Clemson. There's a couple things that we need to get into as far as that's concerned. Now, I want to preface all of this saying it doesn't really matter because it's going to work itself out, but initial positioning, it does matter in the sense of Georgia and Tennessee. Georgia's number 3, Tennessee's number 1. They play each other this weekend. Michigan is number 5, Ohio State's number 2. They'll play each other in week 13. Some of these things will work themselves out. However, if you have this perception of one team is better than the other, and right now that's Clemson over Michigan, Clemson doesn't really play anybody down the stretch. They have Notre Dame this weekend. It can cause something of a conundrum for Michigan, especially if it's a one-loss team. So Michigan has essentially no room for error here. So that's the big thing that we have to look at there. We did listen to Boo Corrigan, I believe is his name. It's the CFP chair this year. And he gave several explanations saying that Michigan's strength of schedule is just not on par with Clemson. Although if you look at like advanced analytics and all of that kind of stuff, Michigan is rated higher, I believe, in Sagarin and lots of different things. You figure that also Michigan is ranked higher in a lot of advanced analytics over Clemson in general. They sit there and say that they're looking for a more complete teams, the most complete teams, and he said that Michigan's just been more workmanlike. They really liked Ohio State more just based off of the fact that they're just going out there and clowning teams. Okay, fine, right? But I guess Michigan has no room for error, right? We've seen other teams like Tennessee now has room for error, right? Because if let's say they lose to Georgia, there's certainly a possibility that Tennessee could fall just to 3 or 4, right? Like, well, if it's just like a 3-point loss, you can sit there and say, well, it wasn't, they really aren't that far off. They're right there. Michigan will not have that luxury. Now, in part, the non-conference schedule, unfortunately, it does play a big factor, right? And that's the unfortunate thing for Michigan's scheduling here. But how good were some of these other teams that others have beaten? Let's take a look at some of this. I want to go into into some of the teams that some of these teams have played, for instance, right? But again, they all play each other. Clemson does have the benefit of a couple teams that are ranked, 3 teams that are ranked here. Actually, I want to back out here and go back to so I can move between the college football playoff rankings and such. So 3 ranked wins. They're all right in a row here. 20, Syracuse, a game that Clemson should have lost. 21, Wake Forest. 22, NC State. Clemson's played a couple closer games, right? Against some of those ranked teams. Now, Michigan obviously has a 1-score win over Maryland. We know that was a garbage time scenario, but they have a win over Wake Forest by 6 points, a win over North Carolina State by 10 points, a win over Florida State by 6 points, and a win over Syracuse by 6 points. Michigan's closest win was a touchdown, thanks to a garbage time touchdown by Maryland. Otherwise, I mean, Michigan has essentially bludgeoned everybody. So there's that. He mentions, Ohio State as being just bludgeoning everybody. Notre Dame unranked, they won 21-10. You know what I mean? That didn't end up being a quality win once everything is said and done. Again, it does not matter. I want to make sure that is very, very clear. It does not matter because all of this will be figured out. It just means that Michigan has absolutely zero room for error. So it is what it is. And it's unfortunate for the Wolverines in the sense of they are just going to have to make sure that they've got their P's and Q's going, right? They can't mess around. They just can't do it. Let's see if I have the making sure I've got everything here. So Boo Corrigan, I want to read you some of the things that he said on this conference call that I just got off of here. He was asked about this. Okay, 1 second here. About the Ohio State-Michigan disparity. Because I've even seen some people projecting Michigan ahead of Ohio State. Now, do with that what you will. Doesn't matter based off of all of this. But he said, that I would say the disparity is not that great. In what we're doing with the rankings themselves, that may be a little bit of a misnomer. But when we looked at Ohio State, the explosiveness of their offense, averaging 49 points a game, winning games by an average of 32 points, I really think that stood out to the committee. We like Michigan a lot as a committee, more workmanlike, controlling their opponent. But again, I think there's a weaker non-conference schedule that was talked about before, and that was part of the determination. I think that it's an odd thing in a way, right? Because when you look at, I want to take a look at last year, for instance, and there were some lopsided scores by Georgia, especially down the stretch. Georgia went in, I believe they were the number one team right out of the gates in the rankings. But you look at the way they beat teams, it's not terribly different than how Michigan beat teams in terms of final score, lots of great defensive play. First game was 10-3 against Clemson. They beat UAB, as you would expect, 56-7. South Carolina 40-13. Vanderbilt 62-0. Arkansas 37-0. Auburn 34-10, Kentucky 30-13, Florida, and this is matching up with where we are in our timeline, 34-7. And like Michigan, they got better in those final 4 weeks and then really started putting it on. Mizzou 43-6, Tennessee 41-17, Charleston Southern, 56-7, Georgia Tech 45-0. They were more workmanlike. So I find it odd that it is considered something of a ding against Michigan here. All right, let's continue with Boo Corrigan and what he was saying about Michigan. He got like 5 questions on Michigan and Clemson. There was a lot of confusion. If you look on, I have on Wolverines Wire Twitter reactions, there's just a lot of really weird people are being like, what the heck? Are you not watching games, committee? What did the committee think of Michigan's resume and keeping them out of the top 4? He said, well, I think they're right there. In a larger picture, the signature win against Penn State, a well-balanced team at the end of it. When you look at the strength of schedule, it is something we do talk about as one of the principles that guides us. At this point in time, after week 9, we felt that they were the right in the number 5 position. Continuing, why Clemson 4, why Michigan 5? I think as you look at 5-0 teams that are over 500, Michigan is 2-0 against opponents that are over 500. That is clearly a factor. That's clearly going to factor in a win at Wake Forest, a win at Florida State. That clearly means Clemson there. And as we're going through it, Michigan's signature win being the Penn State game. But again, all we can do is base it on where we are at this point in time. Is the workmanlike part negative? He said, no. I don't think it's a negative at all to use that phrase because they've done a good job controlling their games and mixing the run with the pass. Really solid defense, good special teams. Again, we're looking at this with the margins in between. These are really good football teams, and it's our job to come up with the ranking on where it is. And this week, coming out of week 9, we saw them as the number 5 team. Finally, the strength of schedule, all of that asked, can Michigan or Oregon work themselves up? He says, well, I think the most important thing is we look as we go into this every week with a clean sheet, and this is where we are after week 9. We'll come back next Monday, go through the process again and scrub and rescrub and debate and go through everything again. But it's our job not to project forward any of the teams with regards to players that may be out and those types of things. It's just to deal with the information we have to date and where we are. Again, a lot of really good teams and a lot of active conversation and debate. So the last thing, you know what, I'm going to save this. We're going to push back the MSU talk And I do have a little kind of nugget that I'm going to share. But we'll get all that in segment 3. We're going to continue this conversation here momentarily. But before we do, listen, this week's thrilling moment in college football is brought to you by Nissan. The thrilling designs behind the new lineup from Nissan are intended to empower drivers and vehicles as capable as the driver themselves. When I think of unbelievable abilities on the field for this week's thrilling moment, it has to be, I mean, it's hard to really honestly pick one. There wasn't like a crazy moment, but I would go with the Blake Corum reception touchdown, that first touchdown in which he motioned all the way out to the one side and then came on in the jet sweep, got the ball on a shovel pass and caught MSU off guard, cut up field, scored the short, I believe, 4-yard touchdown. I think both of them were 4-yard touchdowns to give Michigan back the lead 10-7. Michigan never looked back against Michigan State. Certainly, there were other thrilling moments. We could have picked Rod Moore. His interception could have picked, I think, even the open of the game with all of the just how energetic the crowd was with the defense. But nonetheless, that's it. That's our thrilling moment. This segment has been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you in the all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today. Available now at nissanusa.com. All right, let's continue on talking about this this college football playoff ranking. Again, it's not really that big of a deal, but it means that Michigan has no room for error, right? And it does seem that if you look at initial rankings throughout time, I'm curious to see if I can look back at some of the archives because it looks like I can. So they're kind of messed up. So I mean, let's just compare real quick, but what teams are what. So the 2020 rankings, I don't know why it doesn't have 2021 here on their site, but the 2020 rankings, that was Alabama won that one. Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M, Florida. That was what it was in the first rankings. Week 17, I mean, just is pretty much the same. So that one is kind of moot. It was a weird year, though. You know what I mean? But if you look at week 10 in 2019, this is when things start to get interesting. Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Penn State, Clemson, Georgia as your top 6. Final week, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia. So you start to see things start to change there, right? Oklahoma was 9th, and then they end up being obviously a much higher ranked team. 2018, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Notre Dame, Michigan. Fast forward to week 14. Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, unfortunately Oklahoma, but no Michigan or Ohio State there in the top group there in 2018. So again, things change in a hurry. Let's go back to 2016. I think that's a good one. Again, this was going to be depressing for Michigan fans. First rankings, Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, Texas A&M, Washington, Ohio State. Then in week 14, ended up being Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Washington. So things certainly can shift and convolve and all of that. One more. I want to look at 2014. First playoff rankings. National championship winner ended up being Ohio State. Ohio State was ranked 16th. 16th. Number 1 in the first ever rankings of the College Football Playoff Committee. Mississippi State, then Florida State, Auburn, Mississippi, Oregon, Alabama. So out of all of those, the only one that ended up in the College Football Playoff in the top 4 was Florida State. They lost to number 5, Oregon, and Alabama was number 6. So that's once it was all said and done there. I mean, Ohio State number 4 in the final rankings before the playoffs started. So it doesn't completely matter. It's just how things go. Now, there's one other thing that I want to kind of look at here, if this will allow me to, and that is, remember we were hearing here about what the about Michigan being having the winning record only against two teams against that have 500 records or better. And I just looking here. Ohio State's 3-0 against teams with a winning record. I believe Notre Dame is they technically have a winning record at 5-3. That's actually kind of surprising. I did not even realize that at this point. Clemson, obviously they've got the 3 ranked wins there. So as he said, but as far as ranked 3-0, as far as teams with a winning record, 4-0 actually against teams with a winning record. That's the one that matters more in the grand scheme than Ohio State and what it's done. But it's not, again, like Ohio State's is crazy. Michigan's 2-0 teams with a winning record. And those teams are Penn State and Maryland. So it is what it is, but at the same time, it is kind of like it's really hard to find fault when you're essentially just beating teams silly the way Michigan has. I understand it's not as glaring the way the Ohio State goes out and win, but that's not how Michigan is trying to win games. Again, you look at the schedule, you look at the scores, it is very eerily reminiscent of what Georgia did. Maybe the defense not quite as dominant, of course. They did get 27 put on them by Maryland. Should have been 20, even so. But 7, 10, 0, 27, 14. Again, 14 in garbage time, essentially, against Iowa. 10 by Indiana, not in garbage time. 17 by Penn State. We know how they got the 14 of those points or whatever. And 7 against Michigan State. I just came away from this feeling like they weren't watching these games. Like they sit there and say they watch cut-ups of every game. Clemson has not been more impressive. I understand the resume, but like, what is it if Clemson's, we've seen this before, other conferences not necessarily being as good. At one point in time, the ACC featured a really, really good Clemson team and not so good other teams. At the moment, it kind of feels like the ACC features a mediocre Clemson team and mediocre other teams. They're finding ways to win. Good for them. But it really feels like Clemson could be the lamb to the slaughter this year. If they get past Notre Dame, they go undefeated. They seem like the type of team that's going to go in the college football playoff and lose like 38-0, like we've seen some of these, like we saw some of the Big Ten teams do before. So it really feels like they're kind of setting them up to be lambs to the slaughter unless something changes. It is what it is. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the Michigan State. There is some more news. 4 more players suspended, including Jacoby Windman. And also, we had some Michigan players and want to talk about their mentality as they move on into Rutgers and all of that. So I think that is important. But all right. So certainly you've heard all about the times that I have gone to the post-game press conference just dripping in sweat, looking ridiculous, get made fun of by my colleagues. It happens more than I would like to admit. But guess what? It tends to go away but when I use SweatBlock. Fixes my issue entirely. Maybe not if it's a 95-degree day. It's kind of hard to, and certainly I've had some of those. Purdue 2017, I'm looking at you. When Chase Winovich called me out because Isaiah, you're sweating, man. Anyway, SweatBlock wipes are a must for everybody's toiletry bag. Whether it's a big presentation or a hot date, anyone can benefit. Everyone can benefit. Or you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with the promo code locked on at sweatblock.com. It's also available at Amazon. All right, let's finish her out here. I think we're all kind of wanting to move on from this tunnel madness, everything that happened. I had obviously the podcast where I was very morose yesterday. I'm not going to lie, I was very affected by all of the things that have kind of happened, from seeing the Jamon Green. I was talking to Sarah last night, and she's like, I don't really understand why you are so affected by this. She's like, I'm not trying to be rude about it. And she wasn't. She was like, I just don't understand, like, why you're dwelling so hard on this. And I'm like, part of it is I know Jamon pretty well, right? I know him as well as pretty much anybody on the team or anyone I've covered. Maybe not like the best, right? Like I didn't interview him as a recruit, but I've come to know him, and he's like a gentle soul, you know, and these stories have come out. Angelique Chingelis wrote an amazing story, a heart-wrenching story on Detroit News about his dad being a trucker. Why was he in the tunnels? Because he goes and he goes up after every game. He tries to hurry up. He and German both usually to hurry up and get ready, and so that when Harbaugh's done talking to the team, they can go spend time with their dad, who's a trucker and drives up from Texas for every game, and so they can maximize their time with him. It just makes it even more sad, right? And I tried to explain it's when you see things from Spartan Media, when you see, I'll just call him right out, Jim Comparoni, or you hear Mike Valeni and Rico, who I had long considered a friend. I might have to reconsider that after just some of this ridiculousness, to be honest. When you hear them blame him and try to make it into this whole thing, and then you know getting bombarded on Twitter with a bunch of, for the lack of a better term, dolts that are trying to create this narrative where no evidence exists that Jamon deserved what he got and all of that. And you know more facts, obviously, you know, like, you know more, in your heart of hearts, you know more because you've spoken to eyewitnesses. You know, the tunnel situation from Penn State gets thrown back up, and, you know, I was there. My video was the one that went viral. And it's like, listen, all I had to do was go into their locker room. I understand you want to try to find through lines. You want to find ways to blame Michigan because you hate Michigan, blah, 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 blah. It hurt my heart. I felt depressed since Sunday, right? Like, this didn't just feel like the way that it used to feel when I really was affected by losses. This felt like worse, obviously, because you're seeing someone in Jamon Green, someone that I care about, getting hurt. And it sucks, you know, so it really affected me. So with that in mind, I was starting to question, how is this going to affect the Michigan players, right? Because they're much closer to Jamon Green than I am, and they still have to go out there and play games. And so we talked to them in the press conferences, and they were like, you know, we all realized we have to move on. Like, I think it was Mike Sainris still. No, it was Olu who said that Jim Harbaugh said that he woke up kind of with an epiphany of just saying, like, we need to move on. I mean, doesn't seem like a big epiphany, but that we need to move on and focus on the teams ahead of us, because that is, I think, in one way, it could be a concern. Now, the other thing that MSU might have inadvertently done is they made this Michigan team angry. So on my way out of the press conference, I will share this one tidbit. And I ran into a player, a popular player, and this isn't all they said, but they said that one of the first things they said to me is, I feel bad for Rutgers. And that was the mentality that I wondered if Michigan would have that, right? That's not a direct quote, by the way, but he intimated something of that nature. I wondered if that was going to be a deal, right? If that was going to be the mentality, right? After the Michigan State game last year, it was like the loss woke Michigan up. You know, they went into the Indiana game saying somebody has to pay. And now that's kind of, to me, that I don't know that Michigan necessarily beats Ohio State if they don't lose to Michigan State, because I feel like they were playing well, obviously well enough to win the games that they had, but they weren't playing angry. And I feel like that caused them to play angry. So that makes me wonder, like, I thought that the Michigan team was already kind of playing a little angry. Now I wonder if they're going to take it up like a whole bunch of notches. I wondered that. So we will see. I heard some other interesting things, some crises averted, thankfully, about potential retaliation. Thankfully, aside from the German Green thing that we saw in the video, it was all averted. That's good for Michigan, of course. Take out your aggression on the field. Missed the Don Brown Don Brown quote, solve your problems with aggression, but on the football field. So there's that. Now, finally, the last thing to kind of bring up here is MSU did do the right thing. It took a little bit of time, but they suspended 4 more players. Among them was, I will reiterate this for the person for who, whatever reason, was really upset at me about saying this on Twitter. Their star linebacker, Jacoby Windman. Sorry, I'm not saying he is a star player across all of college football. I'm not giving him a Heisman Trophy, but he is a star player in terms of being one of those guys that, like, when Seth for MGO Blog does his little chart of like players to look out for, Jacoby Windman is one of them. Now, he played terribly against Michigan, thankfully for Michigan, of course, in part because of what Michigan's just better. But he is a star player for Michigan State. That is a huge blow for Michigan State, right? He's not some scrub that, like, oh, they don't need him to win games. No, they do. They've needed him to help them win the few games that they have. He's a 3-time Big Ten Player of the Week, and I would imagine that the 3 times that he won it were those three times that they won games, right? That tells you exactly how important he is to that team. He is suspended indefinitely for his role in the fracas that took place in the tunnel, deservedly so. 3 others, none named Jaden Reed, who was seen in the one video. Again, it's hard to tell how involved he was. So we'll continue to find out more as this goes along. So I'm going to urge some patience to some degree right now. They needed to do this before they got to a game, right? Now, if we find out Jaden Reed and certainly was involved, and he plays 2 games and then he's suspended, then there's more issues there, right? But I mean, he's in the one video. I'm not saying he was for sure involved. I don't want MSU people coming at me saying that I'm making wild allegations. He's in the video. It's hard to really see what his involvement was other than he was in it. But certainly there are people that are better at tracking these things down than me that are going to investigate. And it sounds like everyone is going to be punished. And brings me to this last part, is this, which I brought up before, the ridiculousness of this fan base and this media. It is absurd that you are out there making up facts in the sense of, here are the things that we know. Your head coach, your athletic director, your president of your university, none of those people are out there defending this. Why are you? Why are you creating things? If you're a Michigan State fan watching this for whatever morbid reason, why are you creating things? I made the mistake of going to RCMB today and just looking and seeing narratives like, actually, Jacoby Windman was trying to break up the fight. Actually, in general, it was the Michigan guys fighting, and all of these other guys were just trying to break up the fight. They were helping. Where do these narratives come from? No one is telling you this. These are just figments of hope. I've never seen so much mass psychosis as I have seen from this MSU fan base. Understand that anyone who knows anything, which does not include Jim Comparoni, are telling you what happened. And the fact that you just can't come to grips with reality because you have created a narrative of everyone at MSU are saints and everyone at Michigan are demons, and therefore good always prevails over evil. That is not the reality of the situation, okay? So it's time to take a step back and recognize, did you ever take a second, to you, people like Jim Comparoni, did you ever take a second to think, are we the baddies? Did you ever take that moment to think, what if it really was a Michigan player walking up the tunnel because he wanted to get in and get showered so he can spend time with his dad? Do you ever take a moment to think about that? And let's just say hypothetically, that wasn't what happened. He went in there and started screaming profanity or whatever. That does not excuse. That is zero. There is zero excuse. If you're gloating, they can say whatever they want. That does not give any kind of excuse to say, well, they were asking for it. So you need to reevaluate the way that you look at life. If you are one of those people sitting there trying to excuse this, right? You need to take off the jersey. Think about how you would react if this happened to your team. If it was Michigan against Michigan State, how would you react? Just take a moment and think about that if you're one of those MSU people out there. Us that cover Michigan, us, even the national media, are all sickened by what happened. Y'all need to get on board because this is not a good look. All right, that's going to be hopefully the last we talk about that. I'm done with it. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but it had to be addressed again. Yeah, that's going to do it. We will be back on Wednesday with, I don't know. We'll see. I don't know what we'll be back on Wednesday with. Thursday, I don't know how I'm going to make the mailbag work. I have a flight at noon. And then, but we'll try to figure it out. We might double up and might have the mailbag on Friday and preview on Saturday. That might be how we do it. I'm not 100% sure. But we'll do those. We're doing at least one live show in New York. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, that'll do it for us right now. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.